All right, everyone, we are continuing now with global digital infrastructure. Your panelist, your moderator right now is going to be Patrick Lynch, Executive Managing Director for Global Lead, CBRE Inc. And on the panel, Jonathan Lin, Executive Vice President and General Manager, Data Services, Equinix. Sri Pinnapureddy, Founder and Chief Executive Officer of CtrlS Datacenter. Brendon Riley, Chief Executive, Telstra, InfraCo. Craig Scroggie, Chief Executive Officer and Managing Director, NEXTDC Limited. Please give them a warm round of applause.
All right, thank you all for attending, and it is a pleasure to have these four esteemed gentlemen with me today. So my job is to move quickly, say very little, because there's a lot these guys have to share. So thank you guys for the preparations you put into it. Again, I'm Pat Lynch, Executive Managing Director for CBRE based in Denver. I lead our advisory and transaction business globally. Sri?
Hi, hello all. My name is Sri Pinnapureddy. I'm the founder and CEO of CtrlS Datacenters, which is Asia's largest rated 4 data center company.
Thanks, Pat. Good to be with you, Sri. I'm Brendon Riley. I'm the CEO for Telstra InfraCo. We created Telstra InfraCo about 4 years ago. So just celebrated our 4th birthday, and that's all of our infrastructure assets, towers, fiber, ducts, conduit, data centers, all of our exchanges, fixed network sites. We're in over 120 locations across Australia, and yeah, great to be here.
Great. I'm John Lynn. I run our data center services for Equinix. We're in 71 metros, a couple countries here and there. But you know, we're the world's digital infrastructure company.
Craig Scroggie, the CEO of NEXTDC. We're Australia's leading data center as a service provider. We're operations in all major cities and offices in Singapore, Malaysia, and Japan.
Thank you, guys. Yeah, the prep calls were quite fun with this group. There's an amazing amount of knowledge here, and we had a lot of just back there. Hopefully you didn't hear us comparing war stories. But I think would be interesting for the audience to hear, and Craig, we'll start with you. 2023 kicked off. Where do you see the opportunities? Where do you see the challenges? And I think with that question, I kind of want to get everybody's input on that one. But we'll go with you first.
Yeah, sure. Well, obviously, we're all back in person. You know, we've just been through 2 years, the world's single largest work-from-home experiment. We all survived. Life went on, capital was raised, businesses continue to be successful, and we rely on digital in a way that we probably never have at any other point in time in our lives. So I think whilst from an equity capital markets perspective and a debt markets perspective, there's certainly going to be a pretty choppy time in front of us. It's not going to have an impact on how we consume and use digital tools and services. There's no question that we're going to work differently than we have in the past. The requirement to travel, the way that we use offices, and you know, the future of hybrid work are all going to be pretty important changes to, you know, the next decade of work. But one thing is absolutely certain, and that is that the reliance on digital infrastructure going forward from today and in 23 will be greater than it's ever been at any other point in time in history.
Yeah, those of you that were here for Dave Schaefer's comments, he talked at Cogent. Think back, if we hadn't had the infrastructure that's been built over the last several years, how different things could have been. So exactly what you're saying. John, what's 23 look like for Equinix?
Yeah, I echo a lot that Craig said. It's an incredible time. I think there's obviously so much that you could center around from a negative perspective on the geopolitical situation, the economic situation, but I think the needs of digital transformation continue to be very real, and I think the work that the market and customers have done over the last 2-3 years has created a stable foundation to continue to accelerate off of, right? And I think that once companies understand what that digital journey looks like, the investment to incrementally drive more business value is incredibly exciting and easier. So what we're seeing is customers are actually leaning in even harder now than in the past, where, again, early days, not really sure. Well, now they're actually not just figuring out how they're going to digitally enable their teams. That's implemented, and now it's how do we start adding more value into that? How can we get to more locations? How can we add more applications into that stack?
Brendon?
Yeah, start off with satellite. You know, that's a big opportunity. We're meeting with most of the satellite vendors while we're here. We're building out Viasat, so we're building out their national infrastructure. We're well down the track on that. A number of other things happening in the satellite space. Australia is a pretty unique continent, as I understand from the satellite providers, in that pretty well the whole of the country can be covered by the infrastructure within the nation. So that's very exciting. We're building a new intercap fibre network to connect all the capital cities of the country and provide better on-ramps and off-ramps into data centres and regional centres. That'll be a dual path fibre network, and the country needs that from just a sheer capacity perspective, because on some of the routes we're pretty well almost out of capacity. And we've got 10,000 sites, traditional exchanges, but a lot of them are converted into data centre sites, edge sites. So we see that as a big opportunity, and also making sure we've got all the connectivity, because often, particularly the hyperscalers want to go to more than just one data centre, so making sure we do that. So there's some of the really big opportunities we're looking at, as well as continuing to commercialise the business that we're in.
We're going to come back to the hyperscale one. Thanks for bringing that up.
Yeah.
Sri.
2023 for CtrlS, probably the most significant year. It's been about 15 years in operation. So far, we have delivered about 120 megawatt of capacity. In 2023 alone, we are delivering about 1.4 million square feet of data center space, which can scale to almost 200 megawatt. Very significant year, and also a very significant year because we are various stages of planning, development, land acquisition of 16 more data centers in all major cities of India. Just to give you a perspective on the when you said opportunities, we are lucky to be in India, which is becoming the largest country by population in 2023, and also with about average age of 29 years, with just a consumption per capita of 20 GB, as against 600 of the United States. We're poised for an excellent growth, and CtrlS is lucky to be in the center of that opportunity.
Fantastic. So you all talked about opportunities. Nobody touched on the challenges. We all follow the capital markets. I think, thankfully, working for the largest commercial real estate firm in the world, my business and some of my colleagues here, we had a good year last year, but broadly within CB, it's a tough time to be selling downtown office buildings or something like that. But within the space that we all work, what are some challenges?
I'm happy to start again. Look, I think leaving the markets issues out of it, there's no question, during the course of the last 2 years that there's been a number of impacts to the supply chain. So the ability to be able to secure the infrastructure that's required to continue to keep pace with the rate of growth is going to be a challenge in the short term. And that means, in the ordinary course, if you would order a generator or a UPS system or other long lead time item, that might have taken 9 months to secure. Now, it can be twice as long as that today in some cases, and that means that the ability to be able to keep pace with the rate of growth is going to be challenged. So inflation is going to be an issue that all of us are going to have to deal with collectively, the industry at large, and we've probably been very fortunate not to have to deal with inflation at that level for a long, long time. And that will have some direct impact on pricing in the short term and returns for shareholders. So I think those issues, and then that will flow through not only to the securing of infrastructure for supply chain, but you'll have wages inflation, the services-related inflation flow through to all the industries. So I think that's one that is obviously going to need to be carefully managed over the course of the next 12, 18, 24 months.
Yeah, I'd say on the inflation front, we're cautiously optimistic. I'd say that customers are understanding and the ability to pass through price increases, and I think everyone gets it, right? Everybody here that works at a company, all of our suppliers have increased prices to some degree or another, and that's being factored in. I might highlight two things that are interrelated between sustainability and public policy. And I think the focus on that, both from a customer perspective, just in the last, call it 12 to 18 months, has been incredibly deep, especially in the Americas, but also in Western Europe, where the regulatory environment for data center consumption and carbon and water and power availability and permitting is it's very different, right? And I think for the first time as an industry, there's starting to be kind of negative discussion in the press and media about data center as a use and engaging with permitting, and so we are spending a tremendous amount of time and investment around getting in front of that, and I think everybody in the industry is, and I think the ability for the industry to partner around that, whether that's on the work in the EU on the Commission for the DCC, and just like partnering together to explain to both our communities at hand, like this is actually a far more sustainable solution than having data centers in individual enterprises. That doing that professionally run is important, but I think also for us as operators, how are we thinking about design? How are we thinking about operations? Like, it's not good enough to just optimize for PUE anymore, right? You have to think about the entire set of your supply chain and constraints, and how can you make sure you're doing things the right way to reduce waste? So that's definitely a huge area of focus that I think is, on the plus side, is going to make sure that as an industry we'll be able to continue.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely felt the tightness in supply chain inflation. I wouldn't call it a massive, catastrophe, but it's definitely tighter. In terms of climate change and emissions, and getting our emissions down, so we've committed that we'll reduce that by 50% by 2030. We're tracking really well along those lines, but I wouldn't say that's a challenge. It's probably an opportunity, and I think for the business, there's probably two things. A little bit to where Craig started. The customer view is we didn't even sell dark fibre 2 years ago. Unbelievably. Our enterprise team used to go and source dark fibre from other telcos, amazingly. So really being able to accelerate further just our turnaround times and autonomous operations for our customers, that's a super high priority. And then from an investor perspective, I think Craig mentioned he was heading back to half-year results and present to investors. Being able to really bifurcate our investor story, so we can talk a lot more about the economics of infrastructure away from retail telco, which is obviously very different. So there are probably a few things.
You and John both mentioned supply chain. Getting better, getting worse? Think back a year, 18 months ago. Any thoughts? And I pointing it out to you guys, but any of the panelists. I'll get to Sri on the downside too, but
I think it's getting. I think it's getting better. I think probably by June we'll be not back to normal, but it'll be pretty good.
I think it certainly has stabilized. I don't know whether or not we'll, candidly, ever revert to kind of pre-pandemic areas, just because I think suppliers are, this is a great spot for them, right? So, the like having inventory isn't in their best interest, and like carrying that isn't in their best interest. So that may end up being the case for some providers. But I think certainly we haven't seen it get meaningfully worse in the last probably like 3 to 6 months. So.
Yeah, I would only add, if you think from the customer's perspective, you put the customer first and say, well, what's important to them? Generally, shutting down old legacy data centers, being in a position to improve their sustainability credentials, carbon offsets, they're all key priorities. But in most cases, they wouldn't lift and shift legacy infrastructure into a brand new facility. So you've got to order new infrastructure. So in the short term, getting 100 gig or 400 gig switches may take a little longer than it did in the past. So some legacy infrastructure may have to be moved and the assets sweat longer than they would have previously in order to affect some change in the short term. But ultimately, those pieces of infrastructure will be replaced with new gear when it's available.
Got it. So Sri, two questions to you now. The supply chain question, if you have a view, and then what are the challenges as you see the next year and plus?
Supply chain, other than some chipset related equipment, which is mostly in the instrumentation areas, or some of the chips which are used in PAHO machines, etc. The rest of them are coming back. The COVID related issues, I think they're getting addressed, but the geopolitical related issues are still haunting the supply chain. That's it. Any other challenges that I see? All emerging countries have a permitting challenge, I would say. There are over 60, 70 different permits you need to get before you start a construction. I see that as the, one of the challenge, especially in developing economies, all the data center operators or the industry in general will face. Another important thing is that I see challenges in terms of environmental. All the customers of data centers are going to demand carbon neutrality or free renewable energy power. So that means that the industry is going to become power producers as well, or do some such activity. So that I see that as a bigger challenge as well.
Fantastic.
Yeah, I might add, like, the scale that our industry has kind of emerged to, and the scale of the customer requirements has advanced so fast in the last couple of years, right? And I don't know, 7 years ago, you're planning a data center, it might look like a 5 to 10 megawatt site, and now you're planning on a 30, 40 megawatt chunk at a time. In a lot of developing markets, like, that's not a thing, right? Like, going to the utility provider, and I remember the first time, like, in a country that will remain unnamed, you go there and you ask, they're like, well, what are you, like, we're not prepared for anything like that. And I think that's, again, opportunity, I guess. Like, I think the opportunity for us as an industry to help these countries with their infrastructure, though, right? And again, at the end of the day, we're fundamentally accelerating the ability for these countries to digitize their economy, get access to all of the benefits that again, we all enjoy. I think is exciting, but that's, again, hard work, right?
That's a great point, John. I wanted to touch, so the hyperscale world is incredibly important to all of our businesses, in material, in some ways similar, in some ways different. Brendon, maybe starting with you, how do you see that playing out over the next couple of years, and how does that, in an obvious way, maybe, how does that impact your business? And behaviors, right? Because that's important to all of us as well.
Yeah. Look, I think when I talk for our business, and maybe my colleagues, particularly from the data center side, are a little further down the track, but I don't want to speak for them. But yeah, I mean, I think for us, what the hyperscalers are looking for is very, very different from what they've traditionally wanted from us. So traditionally, they're buying lit services. Right. So we can see a massive shift to dark fiber solutions. Dark fiber solutions across a country the size of Australia, which is basically the same size as continental US. You go into a completely different architecture in terms of being able to construct fiber, and each of the hyperscalers have their own unique requirements. We're definitely seeing a shift to them building more of their own unique infrastructure. So shared infrastructure, yes, that's important. That will continue to be the case, but we're definitely seeing a lot more dedicated infrastructure builds, particularly when it's connecting major metro data centers and creating that web for their enterprise customers. I guess my view is you want to definitely go with the global hyperscalers. They're there to solve problems for their businesses, so you need to be a part of the solution for the problems that they're trying to solve. So that's very much the approach that we're trying to take. But I think big changes for our industry. Maybe Australia lags the US a little bit, so maybe some of these trends have already played out in the US, but I can definitely see some big changes coming.
That's really interesting. Sri, how would you answer the hyperscale question for your businesses?
Yeah, I mean, everyone enjoyed the hyperscale growth led by hyperscale, all data centers worldwide, I think. But things are changing in the hyperscale world for data center outsourcing. All the hyperscalers I see now have ambitions, most of them, have ambitions to build their own data centers. And they've been successful to some extent, and they're struggling in some markets. But my view is that overall they are going to learn someday or the other how to build these data centers. So that's kind of a challenge. I see a 30 to 50% reduction in demand from them. However, the good news is that the growth is outpacing their ability to build. They're almost doubling their capacity requirements every year. At least that's what I've seen in India and then some of the emerging markets. So that's good news. And also, they're coming up with newer formats where they need capacities not just in one large hyperscaler format data center, but they need smaller requirements in many cities. So that's again is an opportunity for the data center players. Coupled with that, the business models are also changing. They are demanding for more flexibility in the way that we used to offer services. I'm sure all of you must have gone through, So overall, I would say very interesting, dramatic change in the way the business is being done with hyperscalers. And I see the trend to continue for the next 2-3 years.
Craig?
Yeah, look, I'd like to contextualise, I guess, the impact that hyperscale is having from the customer's view if we put ourselves in the customer's position and think about what the key change is going to be. In the course of the next decade, we'll have another order of magnitude shift in capability. What it means from a productivity standpoint is if you go back 10 years ago, when we were building a 10 megawatt data centre, today we're building 100 megawatt data centres. So in less than a decade, we've had an order of magnitude shift. And on the network, it goes from 1 gig switches to 10 gig switches to 100 gig switches and to 400. So what that means for the customer from a productivity standpoint is we're going to have access to more capability at a lower cost that's more sustainable, that's more secure, that's sovereign. When we can deal with security and data sovereignty and efficiency and sustainability and do it through global scale, we can really allow the customer to focus on solving problems that are within their core business, and they don't have to worry about building and supplying the infrastructure or the ancillary services that are not core to what they do. So I think the most significant change from the customer's perspective is we're going to have an order of magnitude improvement in productivity. And for anyone that's played with ChatGPT recently, as an example, I was reflecting on it and looking at, started as a software engineer 25 years ago, and when I went to school, we got to use a calculator, and I thought that was magic, whereas for my parents, they were having to write it out, long division. And today, we're about to see another order of magnitude change in productivity, where a lot of creative writing and other things will be capable of being done to allow an improvement in productivity. It's not the answer in of itself, but it means that we're going to have another order of magnitude shift in productivity, and this is probably the most exciting time in our lives.
That's awesome. I love that. So John, same question, but an added piece to it. In the seat that you have with Equinix, if you could touch on the behavior, and then not asking specifically about any companies, I know we can't do that, but do you see behaviors kind of similar across the globe, or do things tweak? So there's a second question there from the seat you get to sit in.
Yeah, I think in general, there's a lot of regional nuance to the capabilities of the hyperscalers on their own self-delivery that you mentioned, right? And I think that it goes back to maybe one of the problem or opportunity areas for all of us, which is talent acquisition, right? I think it's very hard to find people that know how to do highly complicated construction design projects, and I think like having that team aboard to be able to handle that for us is one of the biggest advantages. But again, I think delivery is tough, right? Especially in when you go into a lot of different theaters, a lot of different permitting requirements, a lot of different interactions that you need to drive. And I think what the hyperscalers are looking for is partners that can do that for them on a consistent basis. And I think, again, Craig mentioned kind of the capital market situation right now. I think what we're seeing early signs of a little bit, and just the candidly is like a little bit of concern from some of the hyperscalers. They're thinking about reducing their kind of stable of providers to more trusted ones that have balance sheets that they know can carry through. I think, kind of the number of asset sales in the past that have happened where, they have really, really long-term interests in control and ownership and operations of those. And when those change, that's disruptive or can cause concern for them. And so we've seen that in conversations. Again, I think that's rational on their part. But we certainly haven't seen any pullback on demand, right? And I think overall what we're seeing is there might be a little bit more cycle time around it. I think there's always been the challenge, and for all of the folks that are operators out there, everybody's always asking us for longer forecasts. The cloud providers themselves don't have a huge long forecast for where they're expecting huge amounts of demand in all those markets, and And I think it's going to be an interesting couple of years, right? I think in the past, if you had a 40 megawatt requirement in a tier 1 market, there was somebody that had spec capacity available. That's probably not going to happen for the next like 5 years, right? That's going to start tightening up pretty dramatically, which is going to change the characteristic of the relationship.
Excellent. Yeah, I mean, the optimism is wonderful, right? We heard that. I was here for Mark Gansey's very optimistic view, and that's great. Which leads to, and Craig, you started to go here, so I'm gonna, with this group, I have to ask the crystal ball question, right? So whether you want to forecast next year, 2 years, 5 years, but what are we going to be talking about relative to the industry, your respective businesses next year? What's that crystal ball look like? And Craig, you started to go there, so I'll let you go first.
I was going to let Brendon go.
You guys can arm wrestle that, but I'm fascinated, and I think others would be from the four of you to give us a crystal ball view. You've got fascinating high growth businesses. So I have to ask that one.
Yeah, look, there's a lot. I'll probably pick the one that's top of mind. Most conversations with customers really fall into one or two categories, and that is the do more with less. How do I improve my operation in order to become more efficient, to focus on delivering better services for my customer? I mean, if we're all not focused on the customer first, we're missing the point. What's important to the customer today, whether you're public, private, or anything else, is your sustainability credentials. Can you do what you do and do it sustainably? We're making a disorderly transition to a renewable energy economy, and getting large-scale sustainable renewables to drive the success of all of our businesses is not a simple problem to solve. It's going to take a significant amount of capital, it's going to take long-term thinking, and it's going to take very, very large amounts of infrastructure to be built over a long period of time. Unfortunately for us, over the course of the last decade or two, the investments haven't been made that need to be made in the infrastructure that are, fundamental to driving the growth of digital. And I think that if I was to pick one area, being able to drive the next decade of growth in digital infrastructure, but do it in a sustainable way, is probably one of the most critical things that we are all going to have to work on together.
Yeah, I mean, it's a theme, really well said. John, you get the crystal ball question next, my friend.
Yeah, no, it's...
I'm not inquiring on stock price, wouldn't do that to you, but absent of that, what does the business look like for Equinix?
I think in sustainability is one of those areas, but I'll be the first to say we have all probably as an industry called the end of the on-prem data center many, many times. But I think between sustainability and kind of...
It's a slow burn, John. It's a slow burn.
It is very slow. But honestly, I think sustainability and kind of the market dislocations we've particularly seen on the utility side, like we've seen, again, customers are like, we're finally done, right? Customers don't have the complexity to do power hedging situations and like be able to make sure that they're protected in these environments. Customers don't have the ability to think through, okay, how am I going to make sure the construction of or the update and refresh of my enterprise data center is actually hitting and aligned with what I'm being fed as my sustainability goals for science-based targets. Like that's not a thing, right? They just do. That is not a good use of their time and energy and investment. And so we're seeing a lot more conversations from enterprise customers just saying like, we're just done and we want to move that in. And that's, again, an acceleration towards, well, what parts of that end up being in the cloud, what parts of that need to be in private control, what parts of that need to be kind of distributed out into the further field. But that acceleration, I think, is going to be very real. And it's, again, super excited time. You can hear, I'm so optimistic about what 2023 is going to look like, again, in the face of what looks like a lot of macro impact, but it's going to be a great time.
That's awesome. Brendon?
Yeah, I think tech continues to reinvent itself, but sometimes with repeating patterns. So if I go back in time, a long time, I joined IBM as a grad, and we were selling bureau time. So you bought computing capacity from a bureau. Okay.
There's only a few of us in the room that remember that.
Yeah, I know. Thanks for reminding me of that, Pat. Thank you very much.
I'm there with you.
Yeah, but what do we do with cloud? Well, it's kind of like a bureau, really, but just a really much more sophisticated method of doing it. Companies got frustrated with having to buy from the bureau. They wanted their own mainframe. And then companies got frustrated with the IT department or DP department, so they wanted their own Mini, and then everyone wanted their own PC, and now we've got all these super powerful phones. So my crystal ball says whether you want to call it the fabric of compute or the fabric of functional delivery to how we run our lives and how we run our companies is going to continue to evolve and, continue to fragment in a way that services, how we want to live and work. So I can see the pattern of what happened to hardware happening to the fabric of information tech and how we consume it all.
Which, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but it's fascinating. It requires kind of supporting what I heard from Craig and John, and we heard earlier this morning in some other presentations, that the incremental investment in the infrastructure to support that has to be there.
Incremental investment, I think we're going to need, given we're going to have to roll out so many more sites and get them connected, so we're going to have a different approach from government on how we get those approved and how we get those funded. Sustainability, how we do it sustainably.
Piece of cake.
Yeah, absolutely.
Sri, your crystal ball, sir.
Yeah, no, I'll touch upon the sustainability since,
please.
So that's been a very serious subject for us at CtrlS, and right now we're building a 140 megawatt solar power plant. We never thought we'll produce power, but that's what we are doing. With that, we will be about 50% of our power will be on a renewable. And we hope to build another 50% as well as soon as we could. We kept an outside target of about 5 years to do that, but at the earliest we would like to get there. And that's going to be the key for especially hyperscale data center providers. Number two, touch upon computing. I see that it's not just public cloud. There will be other formats of computing. Private cloud is here to stay, I feel. I can sense some of the customers going back and forth. It could be costs, or it could be various reasons why they do it. And then another big thing that I see is, so far, the whole data center industry is restricted to about, let's say, 10, 12 countries. I see this horizon expanding to close to 70, 80 in the next 5 to 7 years. That's a big, opportunity for the industry. I see it as edge computing will become reality. So far, everyone is talking about it. Big numbers we are seeing. But it'll become reality in the next 4 to 5 years. And the 5G and virtual reality are also becoming, available, which means that data explosion, what it means is probably everybody connected to the industry, I don't know, to the telecom service providers or whether it's data centers, are in for a massive growth opportunity.
I think that wraps us up. You can see I had an absolute great time working with these guys to prepare for this panel, and it's hard not to be excited about the industry when the four of you start to talk about it with us. So thank you all very much. Thanks for attending. I think we go to lunch now, but thank you guys.
Great.